Hi, this is Dr. Gregory Sadler. I'm a professor of philosophy and the president and founder of an educational consulting company called Reason.io, where we put philosophy into practice. I've studied and taught philosophy for over 20 years, and I find that many people run into difficulties reading classic philosophical texts. Sometimes it's the way things are said or how the text is structured. But the concepts themselves are not always that complicated, and that's where I come in. To help students and lifelong learners, I've been producing longer lecture videos and posting them to YouTube. Many viewers say they find them useful. What you're currently watching is part of a new series of shorter videos, each of them focused on one core concept from an important philosophical text. I hope you find it useful as well. In Thomas Nagel's article, What Is It Like to Be a Bat?, before we actually get to that sort of speculation, we get some reflections on a major project within not just philosophy but also other related fields that Nagel is a bit more skeptical of and wants to raise some doubts and criticisms of. And we could call it reductionism. In a broad sense, he talks about the recent wave of reductionist euphoria. What does that actually mean? Well, accounts that could take a wide range of phenomena, particularly mental phenomena and mental concepts, we might also say mental states, and explain them, analyze them, perhaps allow us even to predict them in terms of something that isn't mental in the old sense of the term, where it's, I know my own mind. Perhaps we can know each other's minds, but minds are not precisely the same thing as brains. There's a difference between minds and bodies. The brain would be just part of the body. And this is an old philosophical problem that has been around for a long time. And this euphoria he's referring to means the, idea, the optimism about some sort of analysis which would reduce the mental down to something that is not mental. And he'll talk about materialism, psychophysical identification, reduction, and he'll give you a whole bunch of examples of these sorts of projects. So what's the problem with this? It seems to be quite successful with a number of other problems. He brings up the water to H2O problem, the Turing machine, IBM machine problem, the question of artificial intelligence, lightning, electrical discharge problem, gene, DNA problem, oak tree, hydrocarbon problem. These are all ways in which we can talk about things in reductive ways and not lose too much in the process. Can we do that with the mind? He says, no, the mind-body problem is rather unique. We can't apply these reductionist analyses to the mind-body problem in the same way as we do to these other problems. Why? Well, he says that philosophers share the general human weakness for explanations of what is incomprehensible. And incomprehensible not necessarily per se, but certainly at this point in time, you ask somebody, well, what is it to have a mind? What is it to have consciousness? And we're not really able to explain that well. It's so far incomprehensible. So explanations of what is incomprehensible in terms suited for what is familiar and well understood, though, notice this key point, entirely different. So, people do this with the brain and the mind. They're like, listen, we understand brains really well.
that's a big assumption right there. Most of us have, some understanding of brains. We haven't actually looked at any unless we dissected some animals back in biology class. And, we basically just looked at it. We didn't do a lot of experimentation. But, we can learn about it. We can computer model it. We can think that we understand these things. And we can also say, well, maybe the mind is like a big computer. We understand computers, don't we? Well, at least we think we do, right? There are a bunch of logic circuits arranged in certain ways. Well, does that actually explain what it is that we don't know? Maybe not. So he says that this has led to acceptance of implausible accounts of the mental because they would permit familiar kinds of reduction. So instead of seeing whether the accounts really work, people are rather pragmatically saying, well, they seem to get us to where we want to be. They let us do what we want to do. So let's assume that they're actually true. And so he says, well, here's an issue. Without consciousness, the mind-body problem would be much less interesting. With consciousness, it seems hopeless. Why? Because the most important and characteristic feature of conscious mental phenomena is very poorly understood. Most reductionist theories don't even try to explain it. They just kind of hand wave or don't talk about it at all. And he says, careful examination will show no currently available concept of reduction is actually applicable to it. Now, Nagel is not being categorical here and saying you would never be able to have a reductionist account that could do that. He just says, right now, none of the accounts that we have are satisfactory. He says, if there is such a solution, it's going to lie in the distant intellectual future. And that's just as true today as it was when he wrote this. So why is that the case? He begins by looking at conscious experience. And he says, conscious experience is a widespread phenomenon. It occurs at many levels of animal life. We can't be sure of its presence in simpler organisms, and it's very difficult to say in general what provides evidence of it. Some, he says, extremists have been prepared to deny it, even of mammals other than man. That's not where most people are. Most people are willing to say that whales and, other higher level thinking animals, the apes, elephants, definitely have consciousness. We tend to think our dogs and cats that we keep as companions have consciousness. Now, when we get down to a spider, maybe not. We don't really know quite so well. But he says, if you're conscious, there's something really important about this. He says the fact that an organism has conscious experience at all means basically there's something that it is like to be that organism. It has not just a conscious experience, but conscious experience is sort of a manifold, ongoing. Notice that he's not saying here it has to have self-conscious experience. It has to be able to recognize itself in a mirror or be able to say I about itself or anything like that. It just has to be conscious of its environment and of its own body. So he says we can call this the subjective character of experience. Now here's the problem. That is not captured by any reductive analyses. Why not? Well, it has to do with the way they are set up. He says that all of them are logically compatible with the absence of the subjective character of experience. That's the way that many of them are arranged. Behavioralism is a good example in psychology, saying we can just look at external behavior. We don't have to assume there are any mental states of any sort. So he's going to say it's not analyzable in terms of the explanatory system of functional states or intentional states. Why not? We can ascribe these to robots or automata that behave like people, though they experience nothing. They're just following programming. It's also not analyzable in terms of the causal role of experiences in relation to typical human behavior for similar reasons. And he's saying, I don't deny that conscious mental states and events cause behavior or that they can be given functional characterizations. I only deny this, that kind of thing exhausts their analysis. Any reductionist program is based on an analysis of something that has to be then reduced. And here's the problem. If you're leaving something out of the account, then the problem is poorly set up. He says falsely posed. And if you leave something out at the start, you're not going to be able to put it back in. He says, there's no reason to suppose a reduction which seems plausible when no attempt is made to account for consciousness can then be extended to include consciousness. It could be that you could have an account and, maybe you can find some way to bridge it. But once you've left consciousness out at the very beginning, it seems difficult to explain how you're going to put it back in without essentially saying, hey, magic. And people do this with things like AI. Put enough circuits together, you're bound to get something that's self-reflective and conscious. Well, that's just magical thinking. Nagel isn't calling it such, but that's really what's going on here. So, as he's going to say, every subjective phenomenon is going to be connected with some point of view. So if we're going to have a physicalist, reductionist point of view, what he's calling the phenomenological features, they're going to have to be given a physical account. Are you actually able to do that? It says these subjective phenomena connected to the point of view, you can't really get them with what he's calling an objective physical theory because it abandons that point of view early on, maybe even at the start with its key assumptions. So reductionism is ultimately going to be a failing project, we might say. And here he's providing you with the beginnings of his argument why. Now, imagining what it's like as best we can to be a bat is going to be a key component in that as the article proceeds.